For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to StratNewsGlobal and welcome to this special series on Pakistan. I'm Surya Gangadharan and our guest for today is Professor Ayesha Jalal of Tufts University in the US. She's a historian and presently on holiday in Lahore. So we are talking to her from her place in Lahore. Professor Jalal, welcome and thank you for your time.
Well, thank you for having me.
Professor Jalal, over the last decade, I know this is a very broad question. What are the kind of changes you've seen in Pakistani society, in attitudes and thinking?
I think the attitude towards extremism, by which I mean the violent extremism that Pakistan was in the grips of in 2010 and 2012, is now being questioned. Has been questioned not just now, but has been questioned over the last few years. And that, I think, has brought about a change. People do not want to continue in that violent mode or fight other people's wars. I think it's a very clear change, even if I may be allowed to say so at the official level, on the sort of alliance with America. So there is a sense that Pakistan's paid too high a price and that this is not what they want. And while I don't deny that the elements that had played a role in supporting the war in Afghanistan and subsequently in Kashmir are still there at some level, I don't think that they enjoy the same kind of explicit support that they tended to earlier on, because they did, of course, turn their guns on Pakistan itself. And I think that has played a very crucial role, which eventually, with the public opinion changing, facilitated the military's move first into South Waziristan, subsequently into North Waziristan. Having said that, I wouldn't deny that there are still pockets of extremism that are worrying, and new ones keep emerging in response to the spaces that have been created by official discourse that tends to privilege security perspectives with city neighbors as opposed to the domestic consideration. So I think that it will have to the contestation with that will continue. Having said all that, I just want to make the other point that, when societies undergo the kind of violence that Pakistan witnessed in the 2010s, the decade of the 2010s, it's very difficult to roll it all back, and there are obviously psychological scars that remain. But I do think that people are really in no mood for being in that exceptional variety of perpetual violence. People are fed up. They want to move on. They're aspirational like everybody else in the world.
So you refer to extremism. What about radicalization? Is this something which is widespread? And what is your take on this?
I think that the radicalization was intended to serve a particular purpose, which was part and parcel of the strategic policy. And I think that has changed. I think that attitude has altered now. And there is a much more complex view of what will be in Pakistan's best interest. And I think that has been something that is witnessed, that is possible to witness at the level of official policy. And I think that has had implications for the way in which violent events are interpreted in Pakistan. There was a time, where there was a denial mode that they couldn't possibly be Muslim. But I do think that there's a recognition that there is an internal problem, there has been, and that it has to be tackled.
So let's come to young people. What do young people want? We know very little really about Pakistani youth, how they are, their thinking. What do they want?
Pakistani youth, first of all, want to be put out of this misery of being constantly targeted as somehow, of terrorist variety. They're very normal people. They're like youth anywhere in the world, which is not to deny that those of a particular strata have been sort of channeled into violent activities. But I think the vast majority of youth are like youth anywhere in the world. They want opportunities. They want, many of them who have the capacity, want to go abroad for further studies. So I do think there's a great deal of commonality in the youth across the board with India and other countries. And I've of course taught in Pakistan over this difficult decade at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. And I did a video-linked course with Tufts. So I think it was very interesting to see Tufts students interact with Pakistani students. And the main sort of comment at the end of the day was, oh my goodness, how they're just like us. So I think that basically sums up I mean, in terms of the response, that they are people who are very similar.
Yeah. So how does the education system work there? Is it predominantly government driven? Is there a lot of space for private universities? Like you mentioned LUMS.
Yes, I mean, of course. I mean, there is the government sector is by far the most important, and I think the problems with the education curriculum really emanate from the government curriculum side. But over the years, private institutions were able to come in. LUMS is the most notable example, and were providing a sort of compensatory. I mean, they were a role in a sense that because there wasn't that kind of caliber coming out of government schools, private schools were still producing some really able students. I mean, some of my students at LUMS went on to do PhD. Some are working with me. But the point I'm trying to make is that the bulk of the students are in the government sector. So the private sector was really facilitating a sort of process. And I'm not sure how that's going to now work out, because now the Pakistan government, the current Pakistan government, is working towards a single curriculum, which will mean that the freedoms that the private institutions enjoyed in terms of interpreting the curriculum according to their own desire may be affected, and that will have an impact in the future, because when it is a government-controlled curriculum, then I think there's much less room for the kind of freedom that I have seen exercised at LUMS over the last decade or so. So I'm not sure. Already we are seeing some additional curbs that I hear being imposed in terms of what sorts of lecture events you can have. So I do think that there is a much more controlled educational policy, which will have an impact in the long run, and will take away the advantages that the private sector was able to utilize to its advantage.
So currently, say a place like LUMS, does it have autonomy from the official?
Not complete autonomy. They still have to follow the Higher Education Commission's protocol in a variety across the board. But there's a lot of, for instance, there's something called Pakistan Studies, which really is supposedly a substitute for history, Pakistan history or South Asian history. And Pakistan Studies, is infamously insular in its attitude towards not just history. It's more ideological than history-driven. That, of course, at LUMS or at private institutions, they interpreted that pretty sort of flexibly, and they were able to do Pakistan Studies in a much more rigorous, complicated way, and creative way even. I think that will be affected with this effort to move towards a single curriculum, which I think will make it less possible for private institutions to do what they like.
So it would appear that the authorities may not be too happy with the kind of leeway given to the private educational institutions.
Well, I think so. I think that's always the case when I mean, I think as you know, the social media in Pakistan is very robust, and has a very different line from the official line. And most of these students, most of these young people are coming out of private institutions. There are very few from the government schools, but I do think that the state would like to be able to control these people more effectively. And how best to control by continuing with a policy of quote unquote rote learning as opposed to critical.
Yeah. And what about something like, say, STEM? There's a lot of interest in STEM in India. Is that also the case in Pakistan?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. But I've always, I mean, as somebody who works in the social sciences and humanities, I don't think that Pakistan actually lags in ability to do STEM. Where it lacks and where there is a problem with the nation is an inadequate attention paid to the social sciences and the humanities. They're very necessary for the soul of a nation.
Yeah, I see. So what's the
can make you so mechanical as to think that you have answers when the world is much more complicated, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let me come to that thing about India also. I'd like to bring that in at this point. You mentioned that even on social media, there's a lot of difference between what the government thinks and what people think. So among a lot of young people, what is the attitudes about India? Are these generally of the kind that we think it is, or is it something far more diverse?
I think there's regret that there aren't more opportunities to interact with Indians. I think that the sort of more sensible and broad-minded people tend to think that there is need for greater interaction. I mean, I think the two states have played a very crucial role in preventing the people of the two countries from really getting to know each other in any significant way. They are forced to see each other through the prism of the official narrative.
Yeah.
So I think that granted that, you have to sort of accept that I can't really say that all the young students have a positive attitude towards India. I think there's a sense of wariness which is inculcated in them, just as it is in India. But I think that equally there are students who want to be and who have been successful. I mean, I know of friendships that exist between Indian students and Pakistani students for a variety of reasons, and which really have and which give them a perspective that they cherish. So I think that the more that people are able to understand the human dimension as opposed to the political and strategic, the better it would be for the two countries. I think there is this complete myth that Indians and Pakistanis are vastly different. They are different only insofar as their state structures and political systems are different.
Yeah.
I do think that there are also similarities. I mean, we can look at the world by emphasizing differences more than similarities. That's a choice we make. So in response to your question, I tended to focus more on the similarities. And I think the similarities are there, which is not to deny that there are some vast differences as well.
Yeah. So last question, Professor. What is it that you would like to see in Pakistan, given the fact that you're an academic and you have a lot of interests? What is it that you would like to see in Pakistan?
Well, I'd like to, I mean, I am, of course, an educationist, Surya. So I would like to see improvements in the educational system, making it more oriented towards creative thinking, moving away from rote learning, so that people can begin to think, I mean, learn how to think, not be told what to think. I think there's a big difference between an ideological orientation and a critical thinking, so that Pakistani youth are prepared to take on the challenges of the 21st century and beyond, not really have pat answers. So I think that's where I feel that there is a lot of work to be done, and I also fear that there is some regression there. That if we are moving towards a standardized curriculum, will we lose that? I think it remains to be seen, but there are concerns and worries. What Pakistanis need are to be able to think on their feet and creatively in the face of massive challenges that are going to emerge, as you know, with this pandemic, which we haven't even touched upon. I think that the social and economic impact of this pandemic requires us to think out of the box. And I'm not so sure that we are preparing our youth for that.
On that note, Professor Jalal, thank you very much for your time. A pleasure talking to you. For all of you out there, keep following us on social media, on our website, track us on Instagram, and keep sending us your comments and observations. We'd like to know more about what you think of this series, and that will give us the incentive to do far more looking forward. So thank you very much, and goodbye.